Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Prosperity 101 Breakroom Economics Podcast. My name is Linda J. Hansen, your host. I seek to unleash the power of employers to reclaim and preserve America by educating employees about public policy issues that affect their jobs. I believe this leads to greater employee loyalty, engagement, and retention, and to an increased awareness of the blessings and responsibilities of living in a free society. Join us each week and be sure to visit prosperity101.com for resources and information. Thank you so much for joining with me today. It is a joy to have you, and we have a very interesting and timely topic, something that a lot of people don't think about until election time rolls around, but we should be thinking about all the time because it's part of protecting our freedoms. Before we get into the interview, I want to say thank you to our prosperity partners, those who send gifts to help us keep the podcast on the air, and to our strategic partners. I'd like you to visit our show notes and on the website, and you can see our strategic partners, the businesses who have partnered with us to make sure we can keep producing these podcasts. Today, I'd like to remind you that you can be a part of the U.S. Christian Chamber of Commerce, where you can join with like-minded believers and do kingdom commerce. You know, your business is more than a business. It can be a ministry in so many ways as you serve people in the workplace. So join with the U.S. Christian Chamber of Commerce, and you'll find the link in our show notes and on our website. And if you'd like to be free to work and free to hire without all the woke nonsense, visit Red Balloon. Again, you can find the link on our website and in the show notes, and join the nation's #1 non-woke job board. And then today I'll also mention Mother Nature's Trading Company, where you can get wonderful products for your health, all filled with the cranberry seed oil from Wisconsin. Products for your health, for your pets. Visit the link from our website, and you will find Mother Nature's Trading Company, all with these wonderful products made in Wisconsin and made in America. So let's keep that American supply chain going and support the freedom-loving employers, employees, and businesses that are our strategic partners. So moving into the interview, if we want to protect our freedoms, our supply chains that I talked about, our rights to do business, our rights to raise our families as we want, you know, the freedoms that we have come to know in America, there's things we need to understand about our Constitution. We've become a constitutionally illiterate citizenry, I believe. That's why I work so hard at what I do. But there's things about the way we run our elections and everything that people don't understand. The Electoral College being one that often causes confusion. Today, I have an expert on the Electoral College. I'm honored to introduce Michael Maibach. And Michael Maibach is the Distinguished Fellow for Save Our States. He is also a policy advisor at American Constitutional Rights Union. But he also has a very deep business background, and he'll maybe share some of that too. But whether you are a business owner or a parent, a student, this episode will provide great information for you because I'm sure you, as well as others, have had questions about the Electoral College. So thank you, Michael, for joining with me. It's just an honor to introduce you to the listeners.
Well, thank you. Delighted to be here, Linda. Thank you very much. I grew up in the southern part of Wisconsin, which is Peoria, Illinois. We had all of our vacations in Wisconsin at Wood Lake, which is a wonderful place. And so I have a great affection for your state.
Well, thank you. It's great. Right now, I'm a little worried about Illinois and some of the politics in
Yes,
Illinois. And
right.
but and I'm worried about the politics in every state, which is why I do what I
Yeah.
do. But Illinois is especially troubling. I've often said that we need a Midwest sweep with the governors, like whether it's Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois. We just need this sweep
Yeah.
of new governors here, and but hopefully that'll come. But if we're going to have elections, we have to make sure they're secure, that they're fair, that they're honest, and we have to protect the rights of all citizens. And I highlight citizens, not illegals. When it comes to voting, I highlight citizens. But I like it. This was part of in your bio. It says, in an era of rising calls for national popular vote reforms, you explain how the Electoral College protects minority rights, prevents regional domination, and ensures presidents have broad, legitimate support. Arguments that are both rooted in historical precedent and constitutional law. So, for those who are crying out that we need a national popular vote, or you hear every election, count all votes. And I often say, no, not all votes, only those that are legally cast, certifiable, and have followed a legal chain of custody. We can't count all votes. But this national popular vote is another cry that is being used to undermine our Constitution. And I'd love for you to just dive in and tell us why the Electoral College is so important.
Well, history is always very important. Cicero said that until you know history, you're always a child. Uh, we have a constitution written by the people of the 13 states. And those states were very jealous of their own place in America and in our political process. So at the Constitutional Convention in 1787, they decided a couple of things. One is they were going to have checks and balances to keep us free. They studied Aristotle and they studied Montesquieu. Montesquieu's Spirit of the Laws was written when they were very young men. And they wanted to make sure that the checks and balances would keep us free. So they want to have an independent president. The question is, how do you elect the president? And there was only one delegate in the Constitutional Convention out of the 58 that voted for a national popular vote, only one. And the rest didn't want a national popular vote. The question was, well, should the new Congress elect the president? But then they wouldn't have an independent executive, so they decided to have an independent election. So how do you do that? Well, every state got the number of electors equal to their two senators and their House members. So this is the electoral votes that we have. It really is at the heart, the Connecticut Compromise, which was the House is by population and the Senate is by states. Every state gets two senators. So that's maybe a long answer, but they wanted to have an independent executive elected by the people within the state. So the last thing I'll say is we do believe in democracy, but we have 50 democratic elections, and then we combine those, and that's how we get our president. So we do count every vote, but then we count them in every state, and then the success of the candidate is aggregated in the Electoral College.
Well, it's fascinating and, can be confusing to people. And that's, I think, where, people get concerned. And it's often used by, people on all sides of the fence at times to confuse. I love that you brought in the lessons from history. And could you repeat that quote you said? I just think that is so good. Those that do not learn from history.
So Cicero, a great Roman statesman and philosopher, said, until you know history, you are always a child.
Ah, it's so good. It is so
Right.
good. And as we look at the history of America and what this has meant for our nation, understanding that history is so important as we move forward, especially in a time where we're kind of in an upheaval and there's such divide. I think the Electoral College is something that really helps protect the vote of the individuals. But then also, can you talk about how it helps against, or really protects against regional dominance?
Yeah, good question. So as it turns out, 50% of the American people live in 9 states. Los Angeles County has more people than 41 of our states. New York City has more people than 39 of our states. And Nassau County on Long Island, which is one of 2 counties on Long Island, Nassau County, which is not part of New York City, has more people than 10 of our states. So when I give a talk on the Electoral College, I include a picture of Central Park in New York City. And I ask my audience how many acres, and the answer is 843. How many of those acres are farmed? And they laugh and they say, no, they walk their dogs in Central Park. They play baseball. They jog. They don't get dirty with crops and animals and things. And yet I show a picture of Whole Foods in Manhattan full of food. I say, my gosh, these New Yorkers, they're not growing anything in their Central Park, but all this food. And then I show a picture of an Iowa farm. And I say, we start our elections in Iowa because they feed the cities.
Mm-hmm.
And we cannot make them serfs. It takes 5 acres to feed one person for a year. If Central Park was farmed, it could feed 136 people a year, not 9 million. So we have to have a voice for the people that feed the cities. But also I show a picture of Caterpillar factory where I worked after college, my first job after college in East Peoria, Illinois. Well, the iron ore for those tractors comes from the largest iron ore mine in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
And there are no people pretty much that live there. So these rural areas provide the factories with their natural resources, and rubber and plastics and all the rest. And then the food for all of us, 3 meals a day. So they have to have a voice. And we can't just have the cities rule, which we'd have for national popular vote. So that's some thoughts about why it's such an ingenious system. When Gore versus Bush, 2000, very controversial election, Bush only won by 5 electoral votes, and they came from West Virginia. Little West Virginia decided that presidential race, if you think about it. Bush went to West Virginia and Gore did not. So if you don't visit the small states, and a lot of times our elections are very close. If you skip New Mexico or you skip Wyoming, you may lose by 3 or 4 electoral votes. And so you can't just go to the big cities in our system. And that should be a comfort for everybody, really including people in New York City or Chicago. We can't really just have the cities run everything. And unfortunately, our cities are not run very well, as it turns out, which is another speech.
That's a whole nother episode. Yeah.
Why our cities are bad.
Yeah, I've actually focused on that some in the past few episodes on inner city crime and poverty and things. But this is so good. And I remember when I was Herman Cain's deputy chief of staff for his presidential campaign, after the election, and they brought in the top campaign managers from each presidential campaign to the Harvard Kennedy School of Politics, and they do this every 4 years, right? And we're having this conversation where they transcribe it, and it's part of history. And they were talking about how several people were discussing how many debates there were that year, and many of the candidates complained about it. And the consultants, it wore the candidates out. It was expensive, all these things. Now, being from the heartland myself, and hearing from people in the Midwest, but also Herman Cain went all kinds of places that people didn't understand, right? Because he understood the people. And, I kept hearing again and again and again from people how great it was that our candidate came to, XYZ city or state, but also they needed more debates. because you have these debates, you couldn't always watch them. You needed to be able to have access and understanding of the candidates. Now that was 2012. I mean, since then, social media is really advanced and you can catch up on things a lot. But you're right. The people in those other states, not only do they not have representation in voting, but sometimes they don't have recognition when it comes to campaigning or information given to them. And so it's really hard for them to have a voice. The Electoral College prevents that. And I love it that you tie it into the fact that they are the ones that are feeding us. They're producing the goods that we need. They're the ones that are really keeping our nation humming. And I love that you connected that.
And the ingenious part of Electoral College that we sometimes don't appreciate is for many, many decades now, we start our presidential selection in Iowa. Mm-hmm. If you think about Iowa, it's hard to fool farmers. They have dirt under their fingernails and they're real people. And so you can imagine all these presidential candidates going to Iowa, and the Iowa State Fair is very famous, but a lot of them do the full Grassley, which is all 99 counties, right, like DeSantis did. This last time, 2024, and by the way, we then go to New Hampshire. And everyone has at least 4 meals with every candidate before they decide, right?
We always used to say that you could do all the doors in New Hampshire in one day. Yeah, I know.
Right. I asked the governor of New Hampshire, who just left office, but I said to him last year when I was with him, why is it important we have a New Hampshire primary? And he said, because people in New Hampshire can tell a phony across the table. Mm-hmm. They have meals with these candidates. If you think about it, after the farmers and after these small towns, then we go to nothing but screens and stages. Mm-hmm. We go to South Carolina, and the rest of the presidential primary is all about media and big money, if you will, not the retail politics. Well, unfortunately, and I'm not a partisan person, but our last president skipped Iowa and New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. And we would have known a lot more about him as a candidate if he had been on those farms and been in those tables in New Hampshire, mm-hmm, long before we had to have him withdraw. Mm-hmm. And so one of the ingenious parts of this system is these retail engagements really do let American people meet the candidate in reality and not just on a screen. So it's a good system, and we only have Iowa and New Hampshire because they're small states, and we don't start our primaries in New York and Los Angeles.
So good. It's so good. I love the fact that you brought up how farmers are real people. And I just thought, you can trust farmers. They know manure when they smell it, yeah, right? Right. And right. So, it's a whole different vibe in these areas than it is in New York or Los Angeles or things. Mm-hmm. And it's so important. And so I'm thankful for the Electoral College. I'd like you to touch a little bit too on the federalism and the need to, mm-hmm, save our states and, yeah, the autonomy of the states in terms of their ability to make decisions for themselves. Could you touch, mm-hmm, on that?
Yes. So the history, again, is very important. The states were very jealous of their power. When the Federalist Papers were written during the constitutional debates, all 13 states had assemblies of people who then voted to ratify the Constitution. So about 2,500 Americans actually were in the 13 state conventions and voted state by state for or against the Constitution. And of course, the Federalist Papers were written by Hamilton, Jay, and Madison because New York was on the bubble. It was unclear New York was going to ratify the Constitution. And so Madison went to New York, and he and John Jay and Hamilton write the Federalist Papers. Federalist number 45, Madison writes, the federal government will have limited powers and enumerated powers and a look outward toward other nations. So think about military, borders, immigration, trade. The states will have fuller powers, and they will focus inward on the people, and they will be endeared to the people because they'll deliver services in each state. And that was Federalist 45. And he was telling the anti-federalists, don't worry, the federal government is not going to run everything. It's not going to have a housing and urban development department or an education department, right? So one of the things that Americans are concerned about is all of our debt and the mismanagement of our government. And with Doge, we're seeing so much that's being unearthed that is really not healthy. Uh, One of the best things you can do as a company, if you want to raise your stock, is to get rid of subsidiaries that aren't functioning well. As soon as IBM announces a closure of a plant and you know, a selling of a part of their business, their stocks go up because the management is making sense of their business. I think what we ought to do is close some of these departments that the states can handle better. We don't need to have housing and education in Washington, so the Congress can have more time for things other than those. So federalism is about that, which is what we call subsidiarity sometimes, which is you do the right thing at the right level of government. So the local government runs elections, not the state. The cities and the towns run the schools. The states don't run the schools. The states have highways and they have other services they render, driver's licenses and all the rest. And then the federal government's supposed to defend the country and have certain things. But because of progressives, Obamacare and Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, all those things, so much of our government now is dysfunctional because it's so hard to manage centrally. So federalism is really about letting the laboratories of democracy, as one Supreme Court justice said, compete. So now we have 7 states that don't have state income taxes, but other states are talking about that. You know, in the last census, we had 12 congressional seats moved to other states because people are on the move. Americans can go from New York and Illinois if they're unhappy with the state government. They can go to Florida or Texas, which they're doing. And so federalism gives people a place to go, to have a different life. If you want to have school choice now, there's 20 some states that give you a voucher to have school choice. We didn't have that 20 years ago. And so the wonderful thing is we have sort of incremental changes as states compete for people and for jobs and job creation. And you would hope that some of the states that are not doing well would change their ways. About half the states are right to work, and half the states require union membership in many jobs. And that drives employers to go to the South or to other places where they don't have to deal with the union if the people in those factories don't choose to have a union. And people that want to work there don't have to join a union to work there. That's what we call free labor during the Civil War, you know. So anyway, the federalism really gives people competition between governments, and so people do run for office, saying our state is number 6 in X, but it's number 30 in Y, and we need to improve on Y.
That's so good. And, you know, it reminds me really of what burdened me to start Prosperity 101. As I shared with you before we were recording, I was, you know, really talking to business owners all across my state before the 2010 election. So this was like 2008, right after the 2008 election. And the business climate in the state of Wisconsin was so poor that people were telling me they would move their business out of state if a business-friendly governor wasn't elected. And, you know, people have no idea how much these policies affect their daily life, their jobs, everything. And, you know, I encourage people, just a resource that people can go to too is American Legislative Exchange Council has their annual Rich States, Poor States guide. good. And I often have Jonathan Williams on. We're working on scheduling for that again to have him on to talk about, the most recent findings with this. And it's laboratories of democracy. We can see what works and what doesn't. Why is this state always number one in certain areas? And, you talked about education. Mississippi, there's just right now people can look up the Mississippi Miracle and they can see what's happened in education in Mississippi as they have changed their policies and gone from really low on the educational standards to really high on educational standards. So whether it's the economy or education or whatever, these states should be able to make decisions. And, if you want to find a solution to a problem, you need to go to the person closest to the problem, right? So local elections and local control is the most important. And so all the listeners, I know that if you're viewing this or listening to this, I'm always saying, call your senator, call your representative, but also call your mayor. Call your state legislators, call your city council person, your school board members, all these things. It's very, very important at all levels. But this federalism is so important, and it ties into, our Constitution is just so amazing because the protections that the Electoral College brings, plus the protections through the authority, the ability of the states to make decisions for themselves based on what the people decide. It's just incredible. It's so amazing to me.
On rich states, poor states, when I was at Intel Corporation, we used to say everything you measure gets better.
Mm-hmm.
It's very important that you measure things in business, but in all your endeavors. How am I doing? Athletes measure all the time. I mean, how fast did I swim that race or whatever? Example of federalism is a lot of us are very concerned about children in school and the devices, the phones, the screens all the time, the sort of impact on personal relationships. So Virginia has now passed a law, no phones in schools.
Mm-hmm.
That's wonderful. Well, the other 49 states can do that if they want. Let's see how it works.
Right.
We don't have to have a national law on that for or against, but rather let's see how Virginia does on that law. And maybe other states will say, this is better for our kids not to have phones when they're at school.
Right.
Talk to each other rather than to the screen all the time. I give speeches in schools, and sometimes there's so many screens in the room with the kids. I just have to say, you have to put those away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so good. It is really important. And I'm glad you brought up the point about you being in business and things. That's one last thing that I'd like to cover is because you do have an extensive business background before you really got into doing this full time, your fight to save the Constitution full time, but your extensive business background, what would you say to employers who, have a burden and would like to help their employees understand the importance of these issues, these constitutional issues that protect their freedoms? What would you say to employers?
Well, one way to think about civics is I'm on an airplane and I've been upgraded to first class, but it's important I have a good pilot, right? Because we're all on the plane the same way. We're all citizens in this republic. And if we don't have a good pilot, we don't have good people in office. So civic education is everybody's responsibility, and business people should and often do care about the business climate. Well, if you want to have a good elections and good people in office, the people that work for you and with you in your company ought to be educated. So why can't a private employer, let's say with 100 or 1,000 employees, bring in periodic speakers at lunchtime so employees can hear about the Constitution, about American history, about all the things that you should know as a citizen. Public companies, it's harder for them to do that sometimes, but with good leadership, they certainly can do it and have debates on the issues. Debating is a very healthy thing. But civic education is vital to our future. Winston Churchill once said to students, the further you can look backward, the further you can look forward. And the reason he said that was, until you know history, as Cicero said, you're always a child, but also human nature doesn't change. That's a conservative, small c, principle. And if you know the broken nature of human beings, you know this is how they did it then, and this is what worked and what didn't work. And that gives us lessons for the future. So looking back on our history really informs us how to do things better. That's when you make a new friend, you say, where are you from? Are you married? Do you have children? I know as a boy, I wanted to talk to my grandparents about my parents. What were they like as children? You want to know that about your history. And so Harry Truman, who didn't go to college, was asked by a young man, what can I do to be a good American? He said, study history. Mm-hmm. And so it's very important that people do it. And history is not all about dates. History is about stories, about real people that did real things that were hopefully helpful to the Republic.
Well, it's so good. And we do need to know that. And I think especially in this era where a civic education, a basic understanding of how to protect freedom, a basic understanding of what freedom is, what prosperity is truly, which is human flourishing and freedom. We need to do that. And I always say that if employers don't do it, who will? Because a lot of these people, these 60 plus million people in the workforce have not been taught in their schools or their universities, and but they're out voting, and we need to help them understand as they go and help to train that next generation. So you mentioned you speak in schools and things, so I'm sure there might be someone who would like to know how to contact you. How can people contact you?
You can go to Save Our States, or you can go to my page on LinkedIn or Facebook and simply ask for a speech. I do them online. I do them in person. I've spoken at 23 states. And have a travel budget. We don't charge anything, so if you believe in free speech, I have a free speech for you or your group, your school. Happy to try to arrange that.
Well, that's wonderful. And listeners, please reach out to him. And also, I'd love to address your group. I'd love to work with you if you are an employer, employers, and if you are an employee and is interested in bringing this type of education and what I offer with Prosperity 101 to your workplace, talk to your employer or contact me and let's set up a call. But the goal is we want to educate people and preserve freedoms and make sure our nation stays free. So thank you, Michael, for talking about the Electoral College, for saving our states with the federalism of our Constitution, guaranteed in our Constitution. And thank you for just providing hope that as we look at history and we can look forward, we can apply really good principles to our lives. And kind of like I used to always tell my kids, we don't always have to make our own mistakes. We can learn from the mistakes of others. So I hope that we will.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a delight to be with you. Thanks, Linda.
Thank you. Thank you again for listening to the Prosperity 101 podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, and leave a great review. Don't forget to visit prosperity101.com to access the entire podcast library, to order my newest book, Job Security Through Business Prosperity, the essential guide to understanding how policy affects your paycheck, or to enroll you or your employees in the Breakroom Economics online course. You can also receive the free ebook, 10 Tips for Helping Employees Understand How Public Policy Affects Their Paychecks. Freedom is never free. Understanding the foundations of prosperity and the policies of prosperity will help you to protect prosperity as you become informed, involved, and impactful. Please contact us today at prosperity101.com to let us know how we can serve you. Thank you.